Achieving long-term financial freedom involves learning new things. You need to know the basics of investing, saving, and good stewardship of your money. But the concepts and terminology can be difficult to grasp at times. That's why on this episode of the podcast, I talk with Jesse Hurst of Impel Wealth Management, who uses pop culture insights to help people learn what they need to know and retire like a rock star. My guest today is Jesse Hurst, the Senior Wealth Manager and CEO of Impel Wealth Management LLC, where he brings more than 3 decades of financial planning experience to the families and individuals he serves. A certified financial planner and accredited investments fiduciary, Jesse has earned a reputation for translating complex retirement and investment strategies into clear, actionable guidance. His mission is to help clients move life forward. With a deep understanding of retirement income planning, estate strategies, and long-term wealth management, he combines technical expertise with a genuine commitment to meaningful client relationships. At Impel, Jesse and his team prioritize honest conversations and custom planning that reflect each client's unique goals and values. Welcome to the show, Jesse.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me today.
It's good to have you on. And we were talking before I hit record that, after 230 some odd episodes, you start running out of things to talk about as far as topics go. So I always look for new ways to look at those topics, new ways to think about them, to understand them. And you're coming out with a book. It'll be released by the time this episode comes out. Book called uh, Popenomics, 12 relatable
Poponomics, yes, sir.
Popenomics, 12 relatable and not boring pop culture insights for retirement success. So I guess the first question is in talking about this, and this is your twist on a lot of financial freedom favorites of topics. First of all, what is Poponomics?
Well, it's kind of like what you said, right? 230 episodes in, there's been, I'm sure I'm not the first person to talk about retirement planning, success, financial planning, successful strategies for transitioning from work life to retirement life, or how do you manage your investments through that. Um, what I felt the world did not need was another dry, boring, numbers-based bunch of charts and analytics retirement planning book. And I have found through the years that relating economic and investment principles to pop culture analogies, whether it's something that somebody might remember from a movie or a Broadway musical or a TV show or lots of classic rock songs. I use lots of rock songs and movies in my analogies with people. It makes it, first of all, fun for people because they look at it and they remember. I had a client to me say to me the other day. I did a blog post a few weeks back, and it was about the resurgence of foreign stocks. Foreign stocks have lagged US stocks for most of the last 10 to 15 years. And I said, it's been a long time since foreign stocks have outperformed US stocks. And I used the Led Zeppelin song, Rock and Roll. It's been a long time, been a long, lonely, lonely time. And I had a 73-year-old lady walk into my office the following week, and she said, I spent an entire afternoon walking around my house singing Led Zeppelin songs because of your blog post. And I'm like, perfect. That's exactly what we want. So, A, it makes it fun. B, it makes it memorable. And it's very different than anything else people have seen or read out there.
And people, absorb information differently and sort of cognitively figure it out differently. And I'll say to people, help me gestalt this for a second. Yeah, let me. The tech term is grok, which is basically a deep understanding of something, and providing a framework, a relatable framework that you can use through analogy to explain these terms makes it a lot easier to understand. They'll pick it up hopefully quicker than they would ordinarily. And again, you make it fun. And I think more than anything else, I mean, there are a lot of ways that, and I've talked to many different guests about how they make this information simpler and easier to understand. But making it fun makes it something you actually want to do. And
Yeah.
that can be tough. And when it comes to financial freedom and financial independence, you're in your 20s, you got your first job, and you want to, you get your independence from mom and dad a little bit. You're out on your own, and you want to do some fun stuff with your money. But the responsible thing is to put some money away into an IRA, your company's 401k or whatever it is, and save for something that's not going to happen for 40 years. So that's not fun.
Yeah.
But
And
I think that by making it fun, it makes it easier. Wouldn't you say?
yeah.
Does that book
Oh,
help in
oh,
that regard?
no question, no question. And I would say that most of the pop culture analogies that I use are probably geared more towards clients 40s, 50s to 60s, 70s, 80s, right? Like it's a lot of the TV movie music references, even Broadway musical references that we use. My oldest son was a touring Broadway actor, so I know more about Broadway musicals than the average certified financial planner. And so a lot of those references start in the 50s, 60s and run through the 80s, 90s. So most of those are things that people my age group 10 plus or minus 10, 20 years seem to relate to. Somebody asked me the other day if I would consider writing a follow-up book for 20, 30-year olds. And I was sitting there going, I don't know what my pop culture references would be that they would relate to, unless they listen to their parents' music or TV shows. But I do agree that making it fun is really helpful. And one of the things that I think just in general, the financial planning process, especially for those younger people, um, can actually be much more freeing than what most people realize, right? A lot of people think, well, I have to be disciplined to put money in my 401k and my Roth IRA and 529 accounts for my kids and pay down my mortgage. But what the financial planning process actually does is it helps define what those dollars are that you need to be doing that with.
Mhm.
Well, if you know the answer to that, then you're not guessing. It gives you the freedom to actually be able to spend the rest of it on current lifestyle, right? You want to be able to enjoy life along the way. And a lot of times people are just guessing because nobody's helped them figure out what do I need to do for the futures? And that leaves me what I have left to enjoy today.
Mhm. Yeah, you have to have, put some aside, pay yourself first and put it aside long term. But you should not only have long term, but short term goals. Obviously, people, short term goals, obviously a car, a house, things like that. And these are all good investments and nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with having short term goals. And in fact, to have a healthy financial independence um, and good financial footing is to have both short and long term goals. You have to have a good, reliable car if you're going to get anywhere, get to your job. You have to have a home that's stable and can appreciate in value and along with everything else in your portfolio. Although cars don't exactly appreciate in value.
No, no.
But I see your point. I mean, you and I are, I'm Boomer. I suspect you're Gen X, and that generation of music. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to think of any kind of musical analogies or things like that. Maybe some of the musicals that have come out on Broadway in the last few years. And I
Yeah.
watch the Macy's Parade, and they always feature a few numbers from different shows. And so that's more my exposure to theater these days.
Yep, yep.
So you go with what you know. And
Well, it's funny, right? Because you kind of mentioned I'm right on the border, right? So I'll be 60 in a couple of weeks here. By the time this airs, I will have turned 60. So I was born in 1965, and depending on which resource you look at, the baby boomers kind of go 46 to 64 or 1946 to 65, and then the Gen Xers
Yeah.
that 1965 going forward. So like I'm right on that edge in between the two.
Right. I'd always heard 1963 for the break point, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's about it. And
Yep.
uh, but yeah, you go with what you know. So all right, so Poponomics is a way of explaining uh, sometimes complex and odd financial concepts and economic concepts in a way that's relatable and understandable. So you have a book on that. What can people who read your book expect to learn from it?
Yeah, well, if you don't mind, I'll take just a minute and explain kind of how Poponomics came to be, if
Sure,
you're
go ahead.
okay with that. Yeah. So I started writing blog posts to my clients in probably around 2010, about 15 years ago. And
Hmm.
I was part of a firm where I was one of three partners, and we took turns writing. So I'd write one, we generally sent out one blog post a week. So I'd generally write one or two a month. And the interesting thing was when we formed that firm back in 1997, my two partners were 48 and 44. I was 31 at the time. So, by the time we got to 2015, 2016, they were retiring and I formed at that point Impel Wealth Management, which I was the managing partner of. So then I had to start writing a blog post every week because I didn't have two other older partners that were part of the firm. And every once in a while, I would tie an analogy to a movie or a music theme or whatever. Um, but when COVID hit in the spring of 2020, a couple of things happened. First of all, when you couldn't be face to face with clients and be in the same room eyeball to eyeball with them, I decided I needed to double down on the communication, written communication strategy. So I started writing two blog posts a week, and it was funny in at the very end of March, early April of 2020, Jay Powell, the Federal Reserve Bank chairman, and Steve Mnuchin, who was the Treasury Secretary at the time,
Hmm.
came out, and this was when the government was enacting the CARES Act, all the stimulus money, the PPP money, and the enhanced unemployment benefits, and the stimulus checks, and so forth. And the Federal Reserve Bank at the same time was cutting interest rates to zero to try to stimulate the economy. And they said in a joint press conference, they said, this is an unconventional recession. This is an unconventional economic time, and we're going to have to use unconventional weapons to fight it. And I don't know what made this happen, but the first thing that popped into my mind was the scene from Animal House where Otter, one of the frat brothers, goes, now we could use conventional weapons, but that could take years and cost millions of lives, right? And so I wrote a blog post comparing the acts of the federal government and the Federal Reserve Bank to the frat brothers of Animal House. And people loved it, right? People thought it was funny and they remembered it and it helped them understand it. Well, then it was a few months after that we saw the economic data through the first half of the year, and the US economy, which ended 2019 at $21.7 trillion, by the time we got to the end of the second quarter of 2020, it had shrunk from 21.7 to $19.5 trillion. And I thought to myself, it's like the COVID shutdowns dug a $2.2 trillion hole in the economy.
Hmm.
And again, it just popped into my head. There was a Friends episode from the 1990s where Joey and Monica and Chandler went to the beach and Joey dug a big hole in the beach. And that's what popped into my head. And just like the ocean came rushing in and filled Joey's hole, the Federal Reserve Bank and the federal government rushed in and filled a $2 trillion hole in the economy with $6 trillion of stimulus. And you sit there and go, well, we just took a $2 trillion hole and filled it with three times the amount of stimulus. Could something potentially go wrong here, right? What are the unintended
Called
consequences of
inflation.
this, right? Yeah, exactly. And the response to that had got me thinking that, hey, people like this. It's fun. It makes people remember it. We get emails back or comments back from people all the time. So I started actively looking for ways to continue to do that. And so that's kind of how my twice a week blog posts evolved. But I don't, do you, out of curiosity, do you write blog posts, or I know you do this podcast, but do you write any sort of blog posts to your clients?
Oh, absolutely. I have my website at richardsonlawoffices.com, all sorts of FAQs, articles, things like that. I've been releasing more and more videos to my YouTube channel because of the Google AI overview, which totally screws over people that market through through their
Yeah.
blog posts. So
Yep.
absolutely. And when you said you were, writing one post a week, that's a good rhythm to start
Yeah.
building authority on your site and everything else. So yeah,
Well,
I see what
it's
you're talking about.
interesting. It's interesting since 2020, I've probably written 700 blog posts, right? But if you write blog posts, you write blog posts, right? But if you write a book, you're an author, right? It's all of a
Yep.
sudden like you have credibility, and all of a sudden people want you to appear on their podcast or speak at a conference or do other things, right? So the book basically took what was a short form blog post where you were addressing a topic in 6, 8, 10 paragraphs and allowed you to kind of continue the thought process from start to finish of a retirement planning, how you start from a vision for retirement to crossing the finish line.
Well, in the course of my business and everything, I've written actually two books. And the first one, Hitting the Financial Reset Button, How to Get a Fresh Start through New Jersey Bankruptcy. Essentially, what I did was I went through my website and I cut and pasted all the articles, all the FAQs, everything else into Word, and then rewrote it and reshaped it into, instead of a bunch of interlinked pieces, one cohesive piece that went into a book, and took me
Yep.
a lot less time to write because I was able to recycle that content into a book.
Yep.
It
Yep.
sounds to a great extent that that's what you did. And
I
books
was
give
able
it
I
a
was
huge
able
amount
to
of
do
authority.
I certainly had a fair amount of material to draw from, right? So you could sit there and say, one of the things on our website, if you go to the Impel Wealth, it's just IMPEL, impelwealth.com. If you go to our website on our resources tab, there's our blog posts, there's our videos and YouTube channel and our investment committee notes and so forth. But under the blog post, you can literally just type in a topic, right? Stocks, inflation, social security, whatever. And then you can see everything I've written about that. So if you're doing a chapter on social security and over the last 6 years, I've written 8 blog posts on it, you've got a lot of material to write, to pull from.
Exactly. Well, you were talking about songs and everything that get points across. I've got in my head, I'm thinking, there's a song that sort of encapsulates how a lot of people feel about being able to achieve financial freedom. They don't think they can. They don't think they can afford to make the investments. And it reminds me of a song sung by the Scarecrow and the Wiz.
Oh, yeah.
Can't win, you can't break even, and you can't get out of the game.
Yep.
It was a very pessimistic sort of song of giving up, and maybe sort of an antithesis, using that as sort of the reverse of the way you should be thinking.
Yeah, and the way I started the book was that so the book is put together, and you can actually see it a little bit on the cover here.
Mm-hmm.
There's all these puzzle pieces, right? So the 12 chapters of the book are written as the 12 pieces of the puzzle you need to put together
Mm-hmm.
to form your unique retirement vision for yourself, right? And so when you look at when you I start the book by talking about putting together a puzzle. Well, when you open a puzzle box and turn over the pieces, one of the questions I'd ask people is, what's the first step you take when you put the pieces on the table? And people will go, well, you got to turn over the pieces so that you can see the pictures on them. You got to find all the edge pieces. Maybe I got to find the 4 corner pieces. And I said, the first thing you got to do is look at the box, right? You got to know what the picture is, right? You got to know what it is you're trying to solve for. And that's your unique retirement vision. It's different for every person. Your family's unique, your goals. your resources, your income resources, your asset resources. And then the second thing you have to do to know where you need to go to get that retirement puzzle put together, you have to know where you're starting, right? And I use the analogy in the book, and I talk with clients about this a bunch, is have you ever, you've ever flown cross country, right? And you got to make a connecting flight in Chicago or Atlanta or Denver or whatever, right? And you get off your plane and you get on the concourse and you know you got to get to gate B37. What's the first thing you do? You look for the concourse map. And as soon as you find the concourse map, you have to find the little place that says you are here. Because if you don't know where you are, you can't figure out how to get to B37.
Right.
So, part of it is knowing the picture we're trying to get to, what the ultimate goal is, but then figuring out where you are, where you're starting from, so you can chart a course to get from point A to point B successfully.
So these different pop culture insights, they're basically the book talks about these 12 pieces of that puzzle, and those are these pop culture insights. Can you give us a general idea of what these 12 pieces are and
Yeah,
what they
yeah.
can learn from
So
them?
Yeah, so the first puzzle piece is determining where you are financially. And I use the "you are here" analogy from the airport analogy, but then I also use the old Curtis Mayfield song "People Get Ready" to start, like how do we get ready for retirement, right? We have to start assessing where we are financially, and understanding that, and maybe understanding some of the challenges. And I do use throughout the book probably a couple dozen client stories, right? All the names and enough details have been changed so nobody would know who they are. They're kind of like client avatars of different situations. But different people have different challenges. And in that first chapter, one of the couples that I talk about is a couple that are clients of mine who have young children who aren't nearly as financially successful as they are. They don't work for corporations with defined benefit pension plans like people did back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. But then they're also dealing with aging parents in their 90s who are dependent on them, and they're kind of sandwiched in there, right? So a lot of times people will look at the book and, start to see people who maybe resemble situations like theirs, right?
Mhm.
Uh, One of the chapters in the book, Puzzle Piece 3, is all about trying to determine what my number is, right? How much do I actually need, right? And you have to determine what are the income sources you're going to have, which for a lot of people is just Social Security, right? Unless you're one of the lucky people who happen to have a teacher or a public employee's pension, government pension, police and fire, something like that. Most of it just comes from Social Security. And then you have to go, okay, if I want to throw out a number, 8,000 a month, 10,000 a month to maintain my standard of living in retirement, and you say, okay, my Social Security is going to provide 4,500 of that and I need 10, then I need to accumulate enough asset resources to be able to create the other $5,500 a month of income. So in talking about, what's my number, I start by pulling out an old Schoolhouse Rock video called My Hero Zero. I don't know if you remember it from the 70s, but a lot of people think, my gosh, I'm going to need a lot of zeros in my investment accounts to be able to accomplish that. And then we talk about what do you need to accomplish? What do you need to build in IRA, 401k, investment accounts, other resources, and so forth that way. So, there's puzzle piece 4 is about maximizing benefits from an underfunded Social Security system. One of the things that I talk about in there is the challenges the government's facing to keep Social Security solvent long term. And I mean, we could spend a lot of time just talking about that. But, I use the movie Airplane, where you go, "Surely we must be off course," and it says, "Yes, we're off course. Don't call me Shirley," right? Um, so you
What's
know,
our
there's
vector,
just
Victor?
right. There's only so many levers you can pull to fix Social Security. There's only like three, four, five of them. In some metrics, the government could fix Social Security, and just like if you were flying, I live in Northeast Ohio, right? So most of the time we fly out of Cleveland. But if you were flying from Cleveland to Los Angeles, it's way easier to make a minor mid-course correction over Chicago than wait till you're out over the Rockies and find that you're hundreds of miles off course, right? And the longer the government waits, the more draconian the measures are going to be that they're going to have to take to keep things solvent long term.
Well, you talk about you know, figuring out what your number is, what your that piece of the puzzle, and then knowing, well, all right, I'm going to need 10,000 a month for that, and so you have to figure out what the different pieces of the puzzle are to fit together to get 10,000 a month. But I would suggest that we go back to that puzzle box lid.
Yep.
And what picture do you see? How do you envision your retirement? And you need, in order to get to figuring out what that $10,000 is, well, what do you want to do in retirement? Where are you going to live?
Yep.
Are you going to move to a more retirement friendly state, which would lower your cost of living? So maybe you don't need as much. You're gonna, move in and move to be near your children or the grandchildren, whatever it is. But
Yeah.
you need to, and again, you're gonna have, like I said, flying to Los Angeles, you're gonna have these course corrections along the way as those goals and everything change. But you need to have a clear idea of the kind of retirement you have, the kind of money you're going to want. Again, adjusting for inflation over that period of time
Oh,
in order to
there,
come up with that number. And then once you have the number, then you can plot that course from you are here to the
yep.
box lid of the puzzle.
It's actually puzzle piece 10 in the book is actually the risk of rising prices during your retirement years, right? And people don't really understand the risk of inflation. Even at just 3% inflation, which is historically the number that we have used for general cost of living in charting out a 20, 25, 30 plus year retirement life expectancy, and if inflation goes up at 3% a year, costs double every 24 years, which means if you retired when you were 62, by the time you're 84 or 86, you need to have double the amount of income just to maintain the same standard of living. And it's funny, from the mid 2000s until just after COVID hit, a lot of times we'd run these projections with a 3% inflation rate, and people go, "Why are you using a rate of inflation that's so high?" And it's funny, in the last 3 years, when we saw inflation go to 9% and then, still settle back in 3-ish%, depending on which measurement you're using. Now we have people going, "Well, why are you using an inflation rate that's so low?" And it's like, it's because it's an average over time. But there's something you said in there that's really important, right? One of the things that we try to do in building retirement projections for clients is we come up with, what do we need for base living expenses? What do we need to put in for healthcare costs? Because we inflate healthcare costs at a higher rate than the general rate of inflation, because we know healthcare costs have been going up at that point. But then we say, for your unique uh, uh, travel and lifestyle budget, what are the things you want to do during your retirement years that maybe you didn't have the time to do? What we always tell people, that once you get to retirement, you're in a unique situation. There's a certain window of time where you have the gift of health, the gift of time, and the gift of resources. And how are you going to use those? So I have clients all the time that'll ask me, like, "Well, how much money do you think I should budget for travel and lifestyle?" It's like, depends on what you want to do, right? So
Right.
I've got a couple that are clients of mine who are retired educators who have a fifth wheel RV, and every year they go down to Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, and they spend 3 months going to campsites and parks, right? Well, they spend $7,000 for 3 months for fuel and campsites. Other than that, it's groceries that they would have spent that they would have been at home. So they can be gone for 3 months and spend $7,000. I've got a client of mine who's president of a company. He's the president of the U.S. division of a company that oversees 23 industrial plants in Mexico, Canada, and China. He's a mid six level figure person in his ordinary income, and he and his wife decided to travel. Have you ever seen commercials for like the Atlantis Resort down in the Bahamas?
Yes.
Okay, well, there's one in Dubai, and they flew first class to Dubai and spent 10 days there. They were gone 10 days and spent $23,000, right? So there's a big disparity between $23,000 for 10 days or $7,000 for 3 months, right? It's like you need what you need to do the things you want to do in your retirement.
Mhm.
So it's really helping people define that.
And what's, I guess, the good news too is that even though you have to adjust for an average inflation rate of 3%, the average rate of return on the market is far higher than that. Even including the Great Depression, you're looking at probably 8 to 10% rate of return, even conservatively, and that's far higher than you're going to see in inflation. And what my wife and I are doing is we have a certain amount. It's all how you put together the pieces of your retirement portfolio. You're going to have your 401k. You're going to have maybe a traditional IRA. If you have some money in a Roth IRA, then you have money that can sit there and grow even in retirement, where you're taking required minimum distributions out of your 401k or your traditional IRA or your SEP, but you can let the IRA money ride, not only to sort of ride out bad markets, but to also continue to have a rate of return far in excess of inflation to help you deal with inflation in retirement.
Yeah. Well, you hit like two or three really important points there, right? One is making sure you have enough liquidity and resiliency built into your portfolio so that you don't have to respond every time the market goes through one of these ups or downs, right? I wrote a blog post a couple of maybe a month ago, uh, kind of in honor of football season coming up, and it was called the blog post was titled "Scoring on Fourth and Seven." And the reason I did that was in the last 7 years, we've had four 20% downturns in the market, right? There was a 20% downturn from September to December of 18. We had the 34% downturn during COVID in February, March of 20. We had the 26% downturn in 22 when the Fed started raising interest rates and Russia invaded Ukraine. And then we had the 20% drop in February, March, April of this year during the tariff liberation day scenarios, right? And if you didn't have enough liquidity to get through those, you risk failing, right? And if you were forced to sell when markets were down, or you did the wrong thing at the wrong time, right? Remember how panicked people were on April 8th of this year. I was interviewed by the Akron Beacon Journal, local newspaper here, on the morning of April 8th, which would happen to be the bottom of the market, about what people should do. And people were just freaked out. They didn't know how far this could fall. There was all kinds of fears about what the tariffs would do to corporate earnings and inflation and GDP growth and whether or not we were going to have a recession. And if somebody had told you on the morning of April 8th that over the next 4 months, right, we would continue to have trade tariff uncertainty, you'd continue to have uncertainty around inflation and the path of what the Federal Reserve Bank was going to do. And even if Jerome Powell was still going to have a job, right, you have all kinds of concerns about economic growth and what was going to happen to corporate earnings. And oh, by the way, in the middle of June, we're going to drop a few bombs on Iran's nuclear facilities and so forth. But don't worry, 4 months from now, markets will be at a new all-time high, right? Nobody would have believed you at that moment, but if you if A, you didn't have enough liquidity and resiliency, or you panicked and did the wrong thing at the wrong time, you missed that, and then you didn't score,
Mhm.
right? And so one of the chapters in my book, and it's funny because when I was working with my book coach on this, he thought this was an unusual chapter, but puzzle piece number 5 is actually called Navigating the Negative 24-Hour News and Social Media Spin Cycle, right? And it is a major challenge for people. When I started doing this 38 years ago this month. So it was August, well, I guess 38 years ago last month now, because it was August of 87 that I
Mhm.
started doing this. When I started doing this, mutual funds were quoted on Sunday in the newspaper once a week, right? People got statements once a quarter. There was no online to log in. There was no CNBC. The Fed wasn't doing press conferences after every meeting. So people in the lack of information just stayed invested and didn't respond to every negative piece of news. And one of the things that I think is really important about that chapter is really talking about the purpose of financial journalism. And a lot of times I'll ask people, what do you think the purpose of CNBC or Money Magazine or Business Week is? And they kind of give me this altruistic answer of, well, they're there to help educate me so I can make good decisions and be successful financially. I'm like, no, they're there to get you to click and watch so they can sell more advertising and keep you coming back, right? If Money Magazine said to you every month, the way to financial success is to build a diversified portfolio, stay disciplined with it, dollar cost average in through your 401ks and IRAs, and don't panic and do the wrong thing at the wrong time, you'd buy Money Magazine once, right? You wouldn't have to buy it every month, right? So it's really interesting if you look at the track record of financial journalism over time. I mean, everything from 1979 Business Week put out this article, that cover article was The Death of Equities, how the stock market's been down for so long, nobody will ever buy stocks again, right before stocks went on a 20-year tear. In 2022, this one is so funny. In 2022, Fortune magazine had on its cover in August a picture of Sam Bankman-Fried as the next Warren Buffett. And over the next 4 months, his net worth went from 20 billion to almost zero, right? And he ends up in jail. So, I mean, it's almost comedic. And I use the analogy in that. I don't know if you ever remember seeing a movie called Being There with Peter Sellers,
Yes,
where
I like to watch.
Peter Sellers played a gardener who talked very slowly and methodically, and people mistook him for being deep and thoughtful. And next thing you know, people were talking about him as a potential presidential candidate and so forth. And he didn't know anything, but it's really funny when you think about what influences people and what causes them to take action sometimes.
Well, a couple of observations for what you said, and talking about the portfolio. One, the importance of keeping a certain amount of your portfolio in cash. If you have these sudden needs for money, an unexpected expense, you suddenly need a new roof, uh, it can, if you take that, if you take some money out of an investment, that's a taxable event. So now you got to take out more than what you really need. If you have it in cash, there's no taxable event. But also, it allows you to draw from that cash during bad times and preserve that. The second observation, you mentioned several dips in the market. The one that was in February, March of 20, if I recall correctly, rallied all the way back up in May. So historically, I don't know if it was May or not, but soon afterwards.
Oh, it was soon.
And historically, whenever there's been a drop in the market like that, it is followed by a huge gain back. So the smart thing to do is, if you haven't retired yet, is to dump even more money in, because your rate of return when that market comes back up is going to be huge. Uh, and
It's
perhaps,
interesting you say that because one of the things that we did in at the very end of March of 2020, right? If you think about it, um, during the dot-com 9/11 scenario, during the 07/08 financial crisis with AIG Lehman Brothers, and during COVID, as soon as the stock market and the economy fell, the first thing the Federal Reserve Bank did was cut interest rates to zero or close to zero. Well, when interest rates go down, bond prices go up. So if you had a portfolio that was, let's say, 60% stocks and 40% bonds, and the stock market drops 30 or 40%, but the Fed cuts interest rates, bonds go up. Well, at that point, to exactly what you're saying, if you rebalance your portfolio to 60% stocks, 40% bonds, you by definition would sell bonds high to buy stocks low to bring you back to 60/40, which is exactly what we did. It didn't feel great at the time because you didn't know for sure that was the bottom. You just knew that you were buying something you were confident holding here at a 30% discount here. And if it made sense to buy it here, buying more when it was on sale for 30% off had to make sense.
Mhm. So, a lot of good stuff, all these different puzzle pieces, and your book will be released. We're sitting here recording this on September 3rd. It comes out tomorrow, the 4th, right?
Yes,
So
sir.
it'll be available to folks to order. How can they get your book?
Yeah, so there's a website. So here's the first copy of the book that will be released tomorrow. It's Popenomics, Poponomics, right? So Popenomics.com. There's a website devoted to the book. On the book website, there's actually a link to the Amazon purchase site, so you can purchase it there. If you're interested, you like this concept, and you like the idea of getting more up-to-date information on a regular basis. We also have our professional website for me and the CFPs of Impel Wealth Management. It's
Mhm.
impelwealth.com, and you can go to the blog page there.
Mhm. And if folks want to work with you, reach out to you and say, "Hey, I need help figuring this stuff out and getting onto a good financial plan." How do you help folks? Beyond your book, what services do you offer?
Yeah, so we do two things primarily, right? Well, the first is help people develop uh, retirement plan projections, plans to say, kind of taking the process of the book. You are here, you want to go here. What's the process that we need to do to get from point A to point B? We charge a flat consulting fee for doing that, depending on the complexity of the client's situation. And then we help clients manage their investments. I always say there's kind of two phases of a person's financial life. There's the accumulation phase, which starts the day you start working until the day you retire. And then probably what's even more challenging for people is how do you manage money from the day you retire to the day you pass during the distribution phase? Because you hit some of it, right? You don't want to be selling low. There's tax implications of different types of investments. And which pool are you going to draw from, the IRA or the joint account or savings or Roth or whatever? So, we help clients. We manage about $350 million of investment assets for our clients here in Northeast Ohio.
Mhm. All right. Well, to close it up, and appropriately enough, and in light of what we discussed, that there's always uh, a recovery, a big recovery after a drop in the market, and that the market itself far exceeds inflation in the long run. Perhaps we should consider the song from Annie, "The Sun Will Come Out Tomorrow."
Its sun will come out tomorrow. I'll give you one more that goes right along with this. I wrote a blog post the other day about all the downturns that we've lived through and how they're always temporary, right? The
Mhm.
downturns are always temporary. Every time we've been through a downturn, we've eventually gotten to a new high. And regardless of how much the media screams that the sky is falling, I don't know if you remember the old REM song, "It's the End of the World as We Know It." I wrote a
As
blog
you'll
post
find.
called, I wrote a blog post. It's titled, "It's Not the End of the World as We Know It. We'll Be Fine," right?
Absolutely. Those two go hand in hand. Well,
Yep.
thanks for coming on the show, Jesse. You certainly added a different way of looking at economics, a fun way of looking at financial planning and financial independence. And I appreciate having you on the show.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. I had a great time.